It's past 11 a.m. in Ukraine. The joint marathon continues on channel 1+1. I'm Solomia Wittwicka, and this is a TSN News broadcast. A truce between Ukraine and Russia is set to last for 3 days. On May 9th, 10th, and 11th, Donald Trump wrote about this yesterday on his Truth social network, noting it involves a suspension of all hostilities and a prisoner exchange in a 1,000 for 1,000 format. The American president noted that the request for a truce was made by him personally and that he greatly appreciates how President Zelensky and Kremlin leader Putin accepted this proposal. Trump expressed hope that this is the beginning of the end of a very long, deadly and difficult war. And this statement by the US president was confirmed by Volodymyr Zelensky almost immediately after it appeared in the public domain. He thanked the leader of the United States and his team for their effective diplomatic involvement. We expect that the United States will ensure the implementation of the agreements by the Russian side. And he noted that Red Square is less important to us than the lives of Ukrainian prisoners who can be returned home. At the same time, a decree on holding a parade in the city of Moscow appeared on the website of the president of Ukraine, which allows a parade to be held on Red Square at specific coordinates that are excluded from the plan for the use of Ukrainian weapons. Trump himself, in an interview with American journalists, expressed hope that a temporary halt to the shelling could be a step toward a longer-lasting truce, and he's glad that Zelensky and the Russians agreed to it.
I would like to see this stop in Russia and Ukraine. It's the worst thing that's happened since World War II. 25,000 young soldiers are dying every month. It's madness. So it's entirely possible.
It's a Russian-style truce. Despite the announced ceasefire, the occupiers couldn't hold out and resorted to shelling again on the very first night. From temporarily occupied Crimea, they launched an Iskander-M missile, and from their own territory, about 40 more drones. Our sky defenders managed to neutralize 34 drones. They were shot down in the southern, northern, and eastern regions. Preliminary reports indicate hits by a missile and several UAVs, as well as falling debris. Despite the declared truce, an enemy FPV drone hit a car in the Polohi district of the Zaporizhzhia region. The driver was killed and 2 passengers were injured. Air raid alerts in the region did not stop. Over the past day, the occupiers launched more than 600 drones and also injured 2 people. The invaders twice attacked the administrative building of Zaporizhzhia Oblenergo. In Orikhiv, they hit an ambulance. At night, Russia launched a strike on the Sumy region. A woman was injured as a result of mortar shelling. A large-scale fire broke out in the Berezivka community. Due to the threat of repeated strikes, rescuers had to suspend their work. However, all fire hotspots were successfully extinguished. 2 people were killed in the Dnipropetrovsk region overnight. In Marhanets, Nikopol district, the occupiers killed a man. 2 more people were injured. A woman is in serious condition in the hospital. Houses, a shop, a cafe, and a gas pipeline were damaged. There is also a fatality in the Sinelnikove region. The Dobovikivka community was attacked by enemy drones. An agricultural enterprise was hit and a tractor caught fire. In the Chernihiv region, a father and son were killed and another person was injured. In the evening, Russia attacked a border village in the Novorod-Siversky district. Drones hit an agricultural enterprise, causing a fire. Around 8 p.m. yesterday, occupiers struck Zolochiv in the Kharkiv region with 2 FPV drones. 1 car was destroyed, 3 others were damaged, and a restaurant building was also hit. The people survived. 3 people were injured in the Kherson region. 20 settlements in the region came under fire. The Russians targeted social infrastructure and residential areas, damaging private homes. Today, Ukraine and the European Union states celebrate Europe Day. Countries unite around shared values, respect for human freedoms, the rule of law, democracy, and peace. In the conditions of war, Ukraine has truly felt this. From our partners, European countries provide not only shelter for Ukrainians and humanitarian aid, but also military and political support in solidarity. Since 2023, Ukraine has celebrated this day with Europe specifically on May 9th, because Ukrainians are Europeans not just by location on the map, but by values, spirit, and respect for freedom. And Ukraine's European choice is enshrined in the Constitution. The association agreement with the EU was signed in 2014, and with the start of Russia's full-scale invasion, the EU granted our country candidate status. Currently, Ukraine is fulfilling the agreement's tasks, but there is no clear date for joining the EU yet. Iran is considering proposals from the United States of America regarding a truce. This was stated by Foreign Minister Esmail Beghai. The country is reportedly formally in a state of ceasefire and ready for constructive dialogue. The Americans have not yet confirmed if they received such consent from Iran. Yesterday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that Iran's response would allow for a serious negotiation process to begin. Earlier, despite the truce, the US and Iran exchanged strikes in the Strait of Hormuz area. Iran attacked 3 American destroyers moving through the strait with missiles and drones. In response, the Americans hit missile and drone launch sites, and later 2 tankers sailing under Iranian flags. Tehran insists that the US military attacked coastal civilian areas first, and the Iranians only responded. Donald Trump called Iran's strikes a light slap and stated that the truce between the countries still holds. Despite this, movement through the strait remains partially blocked for vessels, and Washington has halted its Freedom Project. The operation to escort vessels lasted only a day and a half. Trump explained its suspension by significant progress in negotiations on a possible deal with Iran. However, another version was circulating in the American media. The United States had to stop the project after Saudi Arabia restricted American access to its bases and airspace. Still, Donald Trump remains optimistic about a deal with Iran and is waiting for a constructive response.
Their system is still very fractured and a bit dysfunctional, so that could be an obstacle. I hope that this is a serious proposal. I really do hope so.
Regime change. After 16 years in power, Viktor Orban is stepping down. In just an hour, a formal parliamentary session will open in Budapest, where Peter Magyar will officially head the Hungarian government. Immediately after the protocol part of the meeting, the politician announced a large celebration. He invited citizens to a party in honor of the regime change in the square in front of the parliament. Magyar's political party TISA, after a landslide election victory, it will have a majority of 141 seats in parliament. Meanwhile, Orban's Fidesz party has moved into the opposition. The fate of the outgoing prime minister himself remains a mystery. It is only known that he gave up his parliamentary seat, as did most of his associates. It is also unknown if Orban himself will attend the party today, because he did receive an invitation. Peter Magyar has already clearly outlined his priorities: restore freedom of speech, start the fight against corruption, and restore relations with Brussels. And that is where he decided to make his first visit. However, he has not yet contacted any Ukrainian officials. Kyiv is waiting for an official talk with Budapest after the formation of the new government is complete. This was stated in a comment to TSN by the Vice Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration of Ukraine, Taras Kachka. Hungarians themselves also support improving relations with Ukrainians. This is evidenced by the latest poll data, according to which 64% of respondents believe that Magyar will improve contacts with Kyiv within a year. The permitted parade on Red Square. For the first time in 20 years, the occupying country is holding it without military equipment or cadets from military schools. Only marching columns of servicemen and representatives of universities of all branches and types of troops are passing through Red Square. And this is a striking difference from last year's lavish celebration. Back then, over 30 delegations from all over the world flocked to Putin for this spectacle. The head of the PRC, Xi Jinping, was there. The president of Brazil, and even Maduro and Orban. True, now one of them is in a US prison and the other is resigning this very day. Instead, the leader of Belarus has traditionally arrived in Moscow, Alexander Lukashenko, the president of self-proclaimed South Ossetia and the disqualified leader of the Republika Srpska. Representatives from Asia, specifically Malaysia and Laos, are also present. The parade itself will also be broadcast with a delay, although Kyiv has granted for its holding official permission. This year, Moscow for the first time requested a ceasefire for May 9th, and air defense systems from other regions were moved to the Russian capital, as reported by the GUR. The Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs threatened Kyiv with strikes on decision-making centers if, as they put it, their parade was disrupted. Furthermore, they called on foreign diplomats to leave the capital of Ukraine. In response, representatives of France, Germany, Poland, Finland, and the EU condemned these threats from the Kremlin, and everyone remained to work in Kyiv as usual. It wasn't just the occupier preparing for the parade. For a whole week, Ukrainians shared on social media what the parade in Moscow would look like. They joked about the holiday in diapers and that Moscow has improved under Zelensky as a hint at the massive security measures in the Russian capital. There are also jokes comparing 2022 and 2026. Supposedly in 2022, Putin planned to hold a parade in Kyiv, but in 26 he can't even hold his victory mania in Moscow in peace. As well as Putin's festive outfit with an anti-drone net on his head. And after yesterday's decree by Volodymyr Zelensky, a slogan even began to spread online. The slogan, "Thanks to Grandpa for the victory and to Zelensky for the parade." In Russia itself, some of these memes won't be seen because mobile internet will be partially shut down in Moscow today as a precaution. Well, and in a third of the regions, official events were cancelled altogether. The first minute of peace. A symbolic action and a historical moment observed in Ukraine on May 8th at 23:01. It was at this time, on May 8, 1945, that the act of unconditional surrender of Nazi Germany came into force, marking the end of armed resistance and the end of the war in Europe. Yesterday evening, during this minute of peace that occurred exactly 81 years ago, a special video was shown on the national marathon United News. And on the eve, on the Day of Remembrance and Victory over Nazism, in the capital's Museum of the History of Ukraine. In the Second World War, for the first time since 2018, the symbolic flame of glory was lit. It burned for only 3 hours, from 2000 to 2300 hours. As noted by the Museum of the History of Ukraine, this symbolic ritual is a sign of our memory of those who fought against Nazism then, and those who defend our freedom today. Well, as for why in Ukraine it is May 8th and not May 9th, that is the Day of Remembrance and Victory over Nazism in the Second World War. And about how exactly the act of surrender of Nazi Germany was signed, see further in the report. Spring of 1945. Berlin has fallen. In this grey building on the outskirts of Berlin, the Second World War in Europe officially ended. The German military and political leadership signed the surrender late at night on May 8th. Historian Christoph Meisner shows us the room where it all happened.
The entire surrender signing ceremony here was quite brief. The Germans entered. They were asked if they understood what was written on the paper. The Germans said they did. Then they signed and left. And after that, first of all, they were imprisoned. It was a matter of 15 minutes. And then a big party began, and it lasted until morning.
Really?
Yes, until morning. 6 o'clock or thereabouts. The surrender was signed back on May 7th in Reims, France, and here the second part of the surrender was signed.
Why did it all happen on May 9th for the Russians?
Because it was European time. For Europe, it was 11 p.m. on May 8th, for the British 10 p.m., but for the Soviet Union it happened at midnight, when May 9th had already begun. For the peoples of the USSR, the war ended when Stalin announced it personally, that is, on May 9th.
Until May 45, this building belonged to the German Wehrmacht, and later it was turned into the German-Soviet Museum of War History. In the house where the war in Europe ended, there are reminders of its beginning, the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
There was a German version and a Soviet one, and in 1945, most likely, no one knows for sure, but Ribbentrop ordered the German version destroyed because it was seemingly clear the war would be lost, so they just destroyed it before that in 1944. They made a microfilm copy to preserve it in case the Americans or the English bombed Berlin, and the document was destroyed. Due to certain circumstances, it fell into American hands. They published it in the late 40s, and later these very microfilms returned to Germany. So they are now in the archives of the Federal Foreign Office. It is accessible unlike the Russian archives. But the fact that one protocol was preserved in the original and the other was not gives room for manipulation by the Russians. That is why in Soviet history there was a non-aggression pact, not cooperation with the Nazis.
For a long time, Germans put an equal sign between the Soviet Union and Russia. This mental map in people's heads was built over many decades. The process was managed directly from Moscow. In 1967, a Soviet museum was created here, exactly when Brezhnev elevated the cult of victory to an absolute.
And until the year 1967, there was a Soviet military administration here in Germany overseeing this area. Then, in 1967, this building was officially turned into a museum dedicated to the Soviet Army. The Soviet Union's narrative was about the liberation of Europe until the reunification of Germany took place. After the year 1991, it gradually turned into what became a Russian-German project. However, in the years 1997 and 1998, institutions from both Belarus and Ukraine joined in as well. However, everything started to change in 2014. We were faced with the fact that the Russian view of history became more aggressive. Everything changed a lot.
The change is noticeable right at the entrance. Only the Ukrainian flag flies on the flagpoles. Until 22, there were both Russian and Belarusian ones.
What else has changed is the contact with our colleagues from Russia. They no longer exist. But our contacts with Ukrainian colleagues have intensified. We helped Ukrainian museums and archives recover after the strikes.
For almost 50 years after the signing of the surrender, the Karlshorst district was totally Russian-speaking. Families of Russian officers lived in the houses. It wasn't until the summer of '94 that the last RF military left here. However, some houses are still owned by Russia.
In May and June of '45, most people were evicted from here. It was a secret zone, and later, in 1955, the Soviet military administration in Germany ceased operations, and German authorities were here. But Soviet overseers remained here. The German security service, Stasi, from the GDR, controlled this territory, and they knew about everyone who lived here. Right here was the KGB territory, and here a unit of the Soviet army was stationed.
The place where the surrender of Nazi Germany was signed became a good field to play on the guilt of future generations of Germans. Putin's Russia loves to use this tool very much, and masks its crimes well. But everything hidden sooner or later becomes obvious. Natalia Yarmola, Alexander Alifanov from Germany, TSN, 1+1, Marathon, United News.